Hi, everyone. Very, very good evening from all of us in the panel today. This is the series 1 of Living with Corona. And the focus of this session is living the pandemic. Coffee with Corona and living the pandemic. So I just want to have a quick introduction that I'll do of the panelists, the speakers. I hope all the tech issues are sorted and you're able to hear us and see us. If there's any issues, just put your note in the chat window. All right, so here we go. We have, and as I call out the panelists, maybe you can put up a virtual hand or you can put up your hand so that everybody can see you. So we have Dr. Ashok. Yes, you can see him. He is a scientist and a biochemist from IISc. He's done extensive research at Cornell University, and he's also got extensive experience as a commercial leader in the biotech space. Next speaker is Major Sharad. Sharad, if you can put your hand up. He has served our country in the armed forces. Now he is completely immersed in the FMCG space and especially in the AlchoBev sector. And as you can see, he has his drink ready for the session. Next is Zaida, a colleague from Singapore. She's very, very much in the middle of the aviation space. She has some interesting global and local insights that she will walk us through of the aviation space. Next on is Shaiju. We were having some technical issues with getting Shaiju's video on, but Shaiju is somewhere here. He has experience in advertising, in O&M, then in radio. He's also then worked in the MarTech and the data field. And currently he focuses on wellness, something very, very important, and helping others, helping colleagues deal with workplace stress. Myself, my name is Maya. I'm an HR professional, worked extensively in tech, IT, and healthcare field in GE, and currently I am the Chief People Officer at Daily Hunt, which is India's #1 news content and entertainment app in 14 Indian languages. So we have a bit of a mix of speakers, and hopefully, we have an insightful session today. So just to get started, the whole base of this discussion is living with the epidemic, or living the epidemic. Now, I think it's fair to start baselining with what is this epidemic? Is it here to stay? Do we have to coexist with it? Will we say goodbye to it shortly? And all of those questions, a lot of them unanswered, but hopefully will get answered during the course of the session. I request Ashok to walk us through and give us a layman's walkthrough of things and the next steps. So over to you, Ashok.
Thanks, Maya. Can everybody hear me? Can I just check? Maybe a thumbs up would be great. Fantastic. All right. Okay. So as Maya said, and I'll briefly repeat it. I'm a scientist by training and got some experience in the biotech industry as a commercial leader. What I'm basically going to do is, everyone's an expert with the coronavirus these days. So I'm basically going to collate information that I've read and as coherently as possible, try to put it together and put it across to you. It may not be the most deep, but it'll hopefully be wide enough for you to get an idea of where we stand. And I will start by sharing my screen, and I'll need one more set of thumbs up if you guys can actually see my screen. Okay. I think to start off is that Dr. Ashok is not a clinical doctor. Dr. Ashok is a scientist. So I have a PhD, right? So any product or anything that you get from this this collation of information that I present to you should not be administered basis what I say today, but is a good enough reason to do some reading on and start talking to your clinician about if you find that it's applicable to you. Okay, so that's the first disclaimer I had. The second one is, of course, none of the products I'll be talking about today really represent anything I have a profitable interest in. It's just information that I've collated so that we can all stay informed together. Let me just hope that start, right? So I have compiled, of the many things I kind of do touch upon today, I've compiled some further reading links, which will be available with any one of us. Should you choose to want to follow up, feel free to reach in. We can go to the next slide, Maya. We were on the subject. I mean, this is the whole talk was entitled "Living with the Epidemic." So it's good to start at that. It's good to start right in the beginning. Is what is an epidemic, right? So the occurrence in a community or region of cases of an illness, specific health-related behavior, or other health-related events, clearly in excess of normal expectancy, is the definition of what an epidemic is. So basically, if there's a disease in a particular region that is above the average expectation from that region, then it's called an epidemic, right? And as an extension of that, a pandemic effectively refers to when an epidemic crosses international borders. So the difference between a pandemic and an epidemic, simply put, is geography. Okay. There are some sort of caveats in how you define it more specifically as a pandemic. For example, it's important to, if a person from who's infected in a region known to have an epidemic travels across borders to another country, that alone doesn't make it a pandemic. It's important that that person also transmits that communicably in the country that he or she has migrated to. Only then is it called a pandemic. And so as per this definition, there were some delays in actually declaring the COVID crisis as a pandemic. That's why I thought it'd be useful to kind of highlight what those definitions were. But I guess the most important point I wanted to make in this slide, and this picture is from the Visual Capitalist. It's an online site that provides a lot of collateral material for these things. Is that there's actually a history of epidemics. While this may all be very new for us, it's been known to happen since, in this particular graph, 150 AD, but there have been known cases even before this, or recorded cases long before this. And the point to be made here is that the number of deaths or number of people who died from these plagues, for example, the Antonine plague in 165 is about 5 million people. Just for context, it's important to note that the world population till the early 1800s was 1 billion. And in the last 200 years, it has swollen to 7.5 billion. Okay, so just keep that context in mind. So any mortality that you see here, a number like 5 million or 30 million in the case of the Justinian plague, is actually a substantial proportion of the population that existed at that point in time. Another thing to note here is that you have the Black Death or the bubonic plague. A lot of the early plagues that were recorded were bacterial in origin, and the cause was a bacterial source. Post 1900s, you see less and less of this, and this is simply because of the invention of antibiotics, right? So most of the recent epidemics that you heard about or maybe even experienced are viral in origin. Okay, most notably the 1918 Spanish flu, which was a H1N1 influenza virus. Having set the stage for that, maybe we can move to the next slide, Maya. Great. So I'll focus you on the left side, on the table on the left side, actually. These are sort of epidemics that have been identified in recent times, since 1967. And many of you may have heard of them, but nothing in the scale of what we're experiencing now. You have the Marburg, the Ebola virus, Nipah virus, which is very endemic in Kerala, especially, right? SARS, everyone's heard about SARS primarily because the same coronavirus or a similar coronavirus is responsible for the SARS and MERS. But interestingly, when this table was put together and published at the end of January, you can see the numbers there. There were only 11,871 cases, right? And at that time, the number of deaths were 259, and the fatality rate was 2.2%. And primarily, this data was coming out of China. And this is pretty much before the WHO had declared this a pandemic. You can go down the slide a bit, Maya, so that people can focus on that blue arrow on that left, right? 4 months later, so since Jan 31st, now we're in May, right? The current number of infected persons with COVID-19 are 4.63 million, right? Of which there have been about 311,000 deaths. This conforms to about 6.7% mortality globally. Obviously, locally in different countries, you have different mortalities, and the reasons to speculate for that are several. They include an aging population, so on and so forth. On the right side, I've actually taken a snapshot of the Arogya Setu app, which I hope all of you have downloaded, at least those in India have downloaded onto your phones. The latest statistics there confirm that there are about 90,927 cases in India and about 2,872 deaths, right? So this is where we stand today. And why we stand here today is because of a virus. And that virus, as I've mentioned earlier, is COVID-19. Most of you know about this. Maya, if you could gently scroll down to the next slide. It's a beautiful slide, again, available on the Visual Capitalist, of how the pathology of this virus, right? So once it infects, so once you are infected by this virus, what happens next? Suffice to say that this virus enters your lungs, and its sort of terminal point of infectivity or activity is in the in the alveolus or the alveoli of the lungs, which are these grape-like structures at the end, and they are in commercial spaces, you say this is where the rubber hits the road. In the human body, this is where the oxygen from the outside gets into your blood. Okay. So this alveolus is a very thin-walled structure. The cell membranes are also extremely thin, and the cells are very thin, in order to allow the diffusion of oxygen from inside that little bubble to outside that little bubble into that endothelial cell, into that group of blood vessels or capillaries that surround it. So what happens is the RBCs, or the red blood cells, travel in the blood carrying carbon dioxide. When they hit the lungs at the point of the alveolus, the walls are so thin that the oxygen diffuses through that lining of cells into the RBCs, and the carbon dioxide is given out. This oxygenated blood then heads back into the other organs and gets pumped around the body, so that you get oxygenated blood to the rest of the body. So when you're infected with COVID, there's a cell type in this alveolus that has what is called an ACE receptor. You may have heard this, angiotensin receptor, right? This is the entry point for the virus into a cell. And since these cells have those receptors, eventually the virus makes its way down here and replicates in here. And this is the site of action, or the battlefield, as you may call it. From here on, your body is fighting a massive immune response against this virus. Like in any battle, at least in the COVID battle, 85% of the time you win. All right. So 85% of us not going to know too much about what's going on in this little diagram here. We're not even going to feel it. We may have a cold, we may have a cough, and we may move on. Right. For the rest of us who go into that next phase of severity, we may feel a little more discomfort and difficulty in breathing, because in some ways your immune system is having a difficulty in coping with this particular infection. The worst it can do, which is in 5% of people, is that there is a disruption in that transfer of oxygen from the alveolus into the blood, as a result of which you don't have enough oxygen for the rest of the organs in your body. There's a syndrome called ARDS that eventually ends up in causing multiple organ failure and eventually death. And this is in about 5 to 6.5% of Indians, right? Because that's the mortality rate. So what ventilators do effectively is they push oxygenated air into that lung and make sure there's as much oxygen going in into those lungs to increase the chances of any diffusion of oxygen into the blood. And this is why when it gets more and more severe, you get put onto a ventilator, right? The process of putting you on a ventilator is called intubation, and there's a lot more to know behind that. But suffice to say, invariably when you're getting onto a ventilator, right, things are always serious. Right? So if we want to take anything away from this, it is that this can be a really nasty virus once it takes over. There is something known as a cytokine storm, which is one part of your immune system basically, raising a big ruckus at this battle site. And once you have the onset of the cytokine storm, you very rapidly progress or regress into the downstream failures that I talked about earlier. This is a good point for me to say that there is one sort of immunosuppressive drug out there that was used in rheumatoid arthritis called Acterma by a company called Roche, that's designed to actually douse out this cytokine storm. So it impairs just the IL-6 antibody and the system that creates the cytokine storm. As a result of this, you survive another day in order to fight the virus. So these are all what you call emergency use indications. Only when you're really in despair will you be allowed to use this. These are not over the counter, definitely, or by prescription available for you to go to a medical store and buy. If I were to ask you to take one thing away from this, is this virus is nasty, so the best thing to do is to avoid it. Right. So if you look at the panel on the right, it says, social distancing. So keep a physical distance of about 6 feet, 3 meters between two people. And just in the off chance that one of you is infected, the other will not get infected. Right. The other is, of course, stay healthy, eat the right foods, because there are some things called comorbidities that exacerbate the clinical condition that COVID-19 causes. Of course, stay informed, and thank you all for attending this webinar, because this is one way to stay informed about what's going on here. Because we're learning things about this virus every day. The pathology I described is not the only pathology. People are reporting pathologies in the kidney and other places as well. So this by no means is complete summary of all the pathologies, but it is one way in which you can try and understand that this virus means business. It's probably not something that's going to go away too quickly. The last point is, of course, if you're in that position where you can donate to the right types of causes to help, then please do. Can we go to the next slide, please, Maya? I won't dwell on this too much, right? But suffice to say, a virus that's 1 micrometer in size, to survive, it needs to be to survive, it needs to be associated with some kind of respiratory fluid, like mucus or something. And so the size of the particle microns in size, right? So the best thing to do in terms of avoiding getting it is to, of course, not go near a person who has it, but even if you do have to pass by someone like that, is to wear a mask. And the N95 mask is one that is designed actually to keep the virus out, but has always been a controversial thing to recommend in entire societies, because we need it to be made available to health workers and healthcare workers. And any attempt to stockpile this in order to to keep yourself safe runs the risk that your healthcare worker doesn't have access to it, and of course they are at the front line of this battle, and they need it the most. So more recently, the Ministry of Health and the government of India has actually reiterated that homemade masks are a good idea. And in order to make homemade masks, it's probably good to follow some of the literature. The paper I'm presenting, I've sort of cherry-picked some data out of here, is a paper that talks about having a silk and cotton double-layered mask, which helps both in terms of mechanical filtering out, as well as providing electrostatic filtering capabilities. So the paper itself is very interesting and recommend you to watch it. The takeaway is in this graph over here that you see on the right side, panel A, if your mask is working, N95 mask is this red line, this is what it'll look like, all right? If you go down one panel to panel B, you'll see that if your mask is not worn properly, it's as good as not having a mask. You may have an N95 mask, but it's not going to work. So follow the instructions of how to put a mask on and take all the precautions required for it to be effective. The CDC in the US also recommends wearing masks. Entire countries like the Czech Republic, for instance, have been very proactive in recommending that the public wears masks, and therefore have contained the spread of the disease. Go to the next slide, please, Maya. I thought I won't get any more technical than I already have. Firstly, in our trial sessions, I think all the panelists slept. I had to wake them up here. And this is a good point to wake all of you up as well, because if you haven't kept with me till now, here's what we need to do. We are in a society that's navigating an epidemic. There's no doubt about it, right? If you go to the green box there, that's what your best case scenario is. Prevent an exposure to this disease, right? If you want to prevent this exposure, you have both pre-symptom and post-symptom. So if you don't have symptoms, then of course wash hands, physical distancing, homemade masks, and of course avoid getting into groups. Suppose you do have symptoms, then of course quarantine, testing, wear personal protective equipment, and of course monitor your symptoms and be prepared for hospitalization. Okay. In the current world, and all the panelists today are going to talk about how this green box is just not viable. It's not happening, right? They'll tell you how they're itching to get out of this green box, right? And I would be happy to cross out of this green box with them if that yellow box had something valuable in it. Unfortunately, today, outside of that ventilator, right, and a whole bunch of repurposed drugs that we're trying, it's like throwing a kitchen sink approach. So we have drugs like remdesivir, hydroxychloroquine, azithromycin, all kinds of combinations that doctors are trying in clinical trials that are showing partial efficacy, many types of improvements in the status of COVID patients, but they have not cleared any of the final clinical trials as yet. It's an ongoing process. There are about 100 such, more than 100 such chemistries being tested in clinical trials all over the world. I would be an optimist today and stick my neck out and say by September, we're going to have something positive. Of course, I can't predict any more accurately than you can. But from an effort standpoint, if you go by how many trials there are and how many people are trying to get something out there, it's very, very promising. And if something here actually clicks, then I think I would endorse the stance that the rest of my panel members are going to bring to this table. We have to get back out because there are other costs involved outside of just health. The last, the blue box that I've shown you there is immunization, right? And this is something, if it's pre-exposure to virus, we call it vaccination. So is there a vaccine available? Well, there's 120 vaccine trials, vaccines in various positions of getting to trial, 8 of which are already in clinical trials. And there's an extensive list of this listed out in the WHO site for those who are interested. So also with the drugs, by the way, all 100 of them are being tracked on the WHO website. So if you're keen on finding out where your favorite drug is, please visit that site. They will give you progress reports, right? However, going back briefly to vaccination, there is no vaccine available currently. And the best possible timeline for any vaccine out there is for an experimental RNA vaccine from a company called Moderna, whose date for completion of clinical trial is September 20th of this year. Right now, understand, once the trial is done, assuming it works, it'll take some time to ramp up preparation and manufacture of the vaccine, and then of course systematically distributing it out to everybody out there. But the fact of the matter is September 20th is we'll know something. So I, for one, am very keen watching that trial. There are many other vaccine trials going on, and many of them have started as early as February. So the phase 1s are more or less done. Many of them are in phase 2 right now. And of course, there is scale up and manufacture that's required. We'll see how that goes, but a lot to be optimistic about here for the long term, right? There is another group of immunized people, right? And these are people who've been exposed to the virus, right? They also include a subgroup called asymptomatic carriers who are exposed but they don't actually show any symptoms, and they're actually carrying the virus with them. One has to go back to my green box in order to understand what to do here, because you need physical distancing again, you have to avoid groups again, you have to wear masks and wash hands. So, we have this very thin window in which we're working right now. And it's something that I'm extremely optimistic will happen in the September-October timeframe. Let's see what really happens. Can we move to the next slide, please? We just skip through this. This is just an example of the WHO website that says, what vaccine trials are in place. And I have a small little diagram here that talks about what's the traditional paradigm for vaccine development and why it takes to conduct the behavioral mindfulness aspect of things we mentioned earlier. It's still not necessary to go around and mix around with people knowing that you have a virus just because there's a tablet to help you, right? And of course, the post-therapeutic area, which everybody is, if you can move the slide up, it'll be good, Maya. The post-therapeutic area, which we all are looking forward to very eagerly, is just appreciate your social freedoms and the society you live in. It's fun hanging out with friends, of course, and therefore, sorry, I'm not seeing slides. Position where you are healthy, you eat right and exercise. Whether there's a therapy, whether there's a vaccine, it doesn't matter, because as we've seen in my earlier slides, today it's COVID, tomorrow it can be something completely.
Hi, sorry, I had logged off. Power cuts in the city. So Maya, does it move to me now?
Yeah.
So yeah, thanks Ashok, and thanks Maya. And apologies for this whole issue of power cuts and the Wi-Fi and everything. Obviously, this also sort of puts the context of a brilliant economy has a brilliant infrastructure. So there are challenges out there. So we speak about social distancing. We talk. Sorry, can you hear me? Right. So we speak about social distancing. We talk about lockdowns, and all very, very valid. We are all scared out there. But there was an interesting slide that my friend Ashok pulled up, which was the incidence of infections. Guys, we live in a VUCA world. A VUCA world is a volatile, uncertain, complex, and an ambiguous world, right? So if we're living in a VUCA world, look at the infections that have been hitting us, the humankind. From 165 AD, I think, if that's far as Ashok went down to. And throw in the tsunamis, throw in the 9/11s, and then see the challenge that we have. And then you take a step back and say, wow, we are so resilient. So keeping that in mind, let's just look at the context of the economy. We got to understand one thing, and I'm speaking from a FMCG, which is a fast-moving consumer group industry. and focusing on AlchoBev, which is, oh, I'm having my Negroni, it's lovely. So, talking from that context, the impact of a closed economy, of a lockdown, of people being unemployed, of an economy which is down, heading downwards, spiraling downwards, is going to have a wider reaching impact to the citizens of a country, to all the people out here. All of us are impacted, and we all know about it. So just to give you a context, what I'd like to just quickly show is, the FMCG market in India is worth about $103 billion. It's an estimated figure for 2020. It's going at a CAGR, which is a compounded annual growth rate of about 23.1%. It's the fourth largest sector in the Indian economy, guys. The GDP of India approximately is, I think, about 2.9 trillion. So this economy is almost about, fourth largest, if you put it in the whole scheme of things. So look at the impact that this is going to have. And this is daily sustenance, your food, your medicines, your food and beverage, and also what we call as, our daily essentials, toothpaste, toothbrushes, and so on and so forth. So let's keep that as a context, right? We've all seen this, right? And there have been very controversial sort of reactions to this. A lot of people say, oh my God, look at that. Where's social distancing? What's happening here? Gentlemen and ladies, this is the AlchoBev industry for you. So let's put AlchoBev into context here. Now, this industry of mine, right? For a state, it contributes to almost 25% in terms of a state's revenue. With GST revenues dropping, with no businesses happening and states closed down, and with liquor shops open, we've seen this might actually go up to almost 50%. Look at the news that you've been hearing. We've all been on WhatsApp, and we've heard, after the news opened up that, AlchoBev alcohol can be sold. We had Karnataka, which had a sale of 197 crores in a day. There are states which are throwing up numbers of 50 crores, 80 crores. So that's the kind of money this industry brings in. It employs approximately about 5 million people directly or indirectly. To take a snapshot out of this, let's look at just the beer industry. The beer industry is, for example, procures about 750,000 metric tons of agricultural produce. If you add the alcohol industry, this might almost double up. It supports more than 2 million households. The industry procures about 500,000 metric tons of glass, which almost accounts to 20% of total glass capacity. Other than this, it also provides revenues to industries which produce packaged goods, cartons, caps, crowns, label manufacturers, and also logistics, trucks. 3 million truckloads approximate movement of alcohol happens per annum. Alcohol, with beer included, accounts to $49 billion of India's revenue, right? So that's the size of the pie. Now keep that in context. If we look at it from a worldwide position, India is number 6 in terms of value. And in terms of a volume, we are the 3rd largest country. That is how alcohol plays together, right? So, Maya, I hope I sort of set the context up in terms of what my industry and what the FMCG industry is all about. And as it's, we are living in a VUCA world. We know how important it is from just a revenue standpoint, from an employment standpoint, from even our own sustenance standpoint. We are all consumers here. How does it sort of impact us? So this is, I hope it sort of gives some an idea to all our to our panel, and also to all our to all our participants on the chat. So yeah, I hope that sets up a context. Maya? You need to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I think one is seeing the industry, at a panned out level. But I mean, I think the question will be, okay, as consumers or as folks in the sector, what does this really mean, right? How will this really play out in terms of balancing what Ashok has said in the first part, and the fact that we do need to get, business moving. So I think you have a couple of points on that, and we have a slide. But you can get started, Sharad, then I can pull that up.
Yeah, thanks. Very, very relevant, because obviously those kind of cues that we saw earlier will scare the hell out of people, right? So let's just look at it from a perspective of, I'll just take a step out and just show you. Now, this is what online users, this is what's happening in the telecom or, the whole internet world or the virtual world in India. From 2017, from 90 million internet online users, this is estimated to go up to 200 million, right? From an online FMCG business perspective, we are looking at this from about $20 billion, it's going to head up to $45 billion. So that's huge. I'm just setting the context up for what lies ahead. And this is also setting what the future looks like, right? So this is the journey that we all have gone through. So if you can clearly see this, stage one was lockdown, and I'm talking about off trade, on trade. This is the channels for sales of AlchoBev, but you can look at it in terms of retail for your shops, your kirana stores, grocery stores for your rations and your food supplies and your other essentials, or you can look at it from a liquor industry as well. So from a total lockdown stage, which happened sometime around March, April, where there was chaos and uncertainty, we slowly started seeing, I think about 15 days ago, when the market started slowly opening up. This was stage two. It's a slow start. People are still cautious of stepping out. Your digital commerce had shut down. Your retail stores had shut down. Your route to markets had all shut down. Consumer sentiment was all over the place. Now it's slowly settling in. We're still cautious. We're cautious of stepping out. We have limited getaways, but what we are doing is bulk buying. And this is where the whole online business also comes. I mean, we're all consumers here, yeah? So we know how many of us have gone down to Big Basket, which is just killing it at the moment, right? We've gone into Big Basket. We're looking at Amazon Pantry coming up. We're looking at Big Bazaar, which is doing home delivery. Stage three is the new normal. This is where mass testing will start off. Outlets will open. Physical distancing norms will still be followed. I'm not going to get into physical distancing norms because most industries are following it. Even touchwood, look at a country like us of our size. People are still maintaining the 2-meter distance. They are wearing a mask wherever it's concerned. They are doing it, right? People are cautious. The word I will use is cautiously confident. There's mass testing. Hopefully the government comes out with some health stamp. Hopefully in a year's time, we have, as Ashok was so optimistic and so am I, that we will have a vaccine in place. But physical distancing norms will continue, right? So moving on, what is the new normal, right? We are all hearing these terms. What is the new normal? So from a retail industry, let's look at it. It's how we buy. Rise of sales in branded products. Because today what we are interested in, hygiene and safety, which leads to an opportunity here for a lot of your modern trade, as we call it, which is your organized sector, right? Like your Big Bazaars, your Spars of the world, your Spencers of the world. They are producing their own branded product under the name of, say, Big Basket Fresho. Big Bazaar has its own brand of, dals and rice and sugars, etc. For the foreseeable future, it will be home cooked. We are not going to see people stepping out so often. It will be home cooked, which in rice is now giving an opportunity to look at, FMCG big companies to say, hey, pre-cut vegetables, ginger garlic pastes, meal kits, ready to eat, ready to cook. That is the new mantra. We don't have time. We are working from home. WFH, right? That's what is happening today. Rise in the last mile delivery through no contact. This is what we're hearing. Your Zomatos are killing it. Look at Dunzo. Mike, it's back. We have Gurgaon in Gurgaon. We have Dunzo. I've been ordering stuff through Dunzo, including ice to make this lovely drink. Let me take a sip. Right. So investment in warehousing. A lot of companies, in order to maintain overheads and its costs, went into just in time, where we all hear about just in time. Today we know to an extent that myth is burst. When the lockdown opened, we saw a lot of our shops very quickly ran out of your favorite bread, your favorite dals, or your favorite snack. So which means warehousing, more inventory will have to be invested in. Investment in technology. We've all suffered. We've just seen what we're going through now with the Zoom call. With people working from home, investment in technology for companies, so whether it is retail companies, companies like where I work, the AlchoBev sector, for your Reliances of the world, for your other various companies that you have out there. I'm not going to take names. Technology is the buzzword. Internet of Things. That's where it's all headed. It's going to be fast track. And look at it. Home delivery of alcohol. Landmark. I don't know how many people do know, but the Constitution of India actually has it written down. It says that states need to move towards prohibition. Supreme Court actually gave a guideline like, hey, home delivery of alcohol is recommended. That's a landmark decision. And it takes you back to the revenue alcohol provides, right? Now look at it in terms of when we look at bars and restaurants that we're all very keen on, we obviously are very passionate about, right? Rise and last mile delivery again. You will be ordering your food for quite some time. It will be coming through. I know a lot of five-star hotels have started now getting onto home delivery of food, right? There is Swiggy, which is happening. The restaurants have cars. They're doing their own deliveries now, right? There's going to be a decline in eating out, especially amongst the 50+ consumers. I see this for a year or so. Restaurants will see sparse attention as a result of this. There will be stricter seating norms. We're already talking about in the offices, a 33% sort of roster system. We will see something similar happening in restaurants. There's going to be, again, a big investment in technology. For all you know, for the next 1 year or maybe the near future, you would be pre-ordering your menu. You would be pre-booking your table so that when you come there, you really don't spend enough time in the restaurant. Your food comes packaged, you enjoy it, and you eat it, and you leave, and the next customer comes in. There's going to be white glove service. Get used to gloves, hairnets, masks. Your favorite waitress is going to look all covered up, I'm sorry. Increased reliance on feedback and rating systems. We will start relying on good restaurants, on the rating systems they get through Zomatos of the world. Weddings and banquets is going to decline. The number of people we're going to congregate is going to reduce. Banqueting spaces might see a squeeze. There's going to be an increased cost on hygiene and insurance, health insurance in your retail, in your bars and restaurants, which is going to be passed on. That increased cost will be passed on to consumers. So expect a higher price for the bill that you pay. Your meals are going to get dearer. Having said that, it's not all doom and gloom. Yeah? I mean, we've seen there are opportunities that are coming up here. And I want to again get you back, guys, to the resilience that we humans have. When 9/11 happened, everyone predicted this is the end. No more social congregations, no more air travel, it's done. When various epidemics happened, everyone said that. Remember, we are a social being. We are excited. How many of us have actually, when we are sitting and having a drink with friends, when we're doing a Zoom chat switch, which don't have such technical glitches as we've had, have sat down and discussed and said, hey, listen, you know what? What's the first thing you guys are going to do? And you turn around and say, hey, you know what the first thing I'm going to do? I'm going to take a haircut. But the second thing I'm going to do is get my favorite beer. I'm going to meet up with all of you guys in a bar and we're going to drink. Because you know what? The pandemic, the epidemic, the virus, whatever we call it, is going to stay. How long will it stay? It's part of our lives now. So the AlchoBev industry works on experiences. The food industry works on experiences. We are humans. We are social animals. We work on experiences. We want to be together. We will find means and we will be resilient. So that's all I need to say. I'm thinking opportunities are there. It'll take time. Let's be resilient. Thanks, Maya. And L'chaim to that.
Thanks, Sharad. So I think there's some stuff that we all love about going out and the FMCG sector that's going to change or maybe stop altogether. But at the same time, what you're telling us is there's some really exciting stuff that's coming up as well, basis the changes that the industry has to make. Now, just segueing a little bit to this world VUCA, right? So if you take VUCA, I think the one sector or industry that's kind of personifies it the most is aviation. I think it's one that has had to go make substantial changes and changing as we speak. And to walk us through some of this, we have I'm not sure what's going on with my mic, but yeah, we have Zaida joining us. Zaida, you may want.
So with all the drama we're having with technology and this hard-hitting information overload from biotech to AlchoBev, I'm not sure if you have the appetite to consume any news on aviation, but since we've got you as captive audience, I'm going to power through. So let's hope you're with me. So I'm based in Singapore as a self-introduction, and I will try to attempt a global perspective on aviation as a whole.
It's just coming up, Z.
It's good. It's good. It's good. Don't worry about it. So coming right out of the AlchoBev discussion, I'm sure this resonates with you, right? Remember the good times? Not so far back in the past? And if this picture resonates with you, then we were one among the 4.5 billion passengers that traveled around the globe in 2019. And a majority of that, at least the major market share of that number was in Asia Pacific. For India, there were about 344 million passengers that touched the airports in 2019. And about 70 million of that was foreign international travel. So with these sort of numbers, we went from this to this. And now with all the flights being stranded thanks to the virus and visa restrictions and being travel restrictions and visas being revoked, this is somewhat what we could anticipate in the future. So I've titled this speech of mine to call it the coronavirus crushing air travel. And I just want to lay in perspective that air travel encompasses so many things. You and me, it's relevant to because we're passengers, it directly affects us. But the backbone to how we travel and why we traveled and those numbers I just stated is in totality air travel. So I'd like to spend a few minutes on understanding the ecosystem first. So if there are multiple players, the ecosystem is large and actually, if you think about it, aviation is the most global of global industries. It employs millions of people, underpins the livelihood of millions more. And if you actually look at it, it's like the central nervous system of international trade and leisure. But now the vast parts of this network are shut down. The daily number of passenger flights dropped to 20%. And in some countries, some regions like India, there was a full suspension on passenger traffic. So we went down like almost overnight. IATA estimates airline revenue losses in this year. We're only in Q2, and the prediction for this year is 314 billion loss for the ecosystem. And by the way, most of the data that I'm sharing with you is widely available on public domain. I haven't conjured up these magical numbers on my own, so disclaimer alert. Okay, let's look at the ecosystem first, right? It all starts with the manufacturer of the airplane. OEMs, as we call it, the original equipment manufacturers. What are they dealing with right now, right? Grounded fleet. This is the nemesis of an aircraft manufacturer. The purpose of existence of an aircraft manufacturer is to avoid AOG, as we call in the industry, aircraft on ground. Today, 2/3 of the worldwide aircraft fleet, roughly 17,000 aircrafts, are grounded. So this is an absolute catastrophe for the industry at large. And when you look at it, Grounded fleet means a lot of the airlines are going to re-optimize. They're going to have to look at their network planning, and no one knows when we're going to resume anything. So they can't do the capacity planning. So that directly impacts any new releases of aircrafts or new production. It costs a lot of money because of delayed deliveries and canceled orders. And the biggest problem of all of this is the parking management for aircrafts. So if you look at it, the whole industry is bleeding. There's an open wound at the moment, and every day that the aircraft does not fly, there's billions of dollars in cash bleed that the whole industry is grappling with. Right at the top of that hill is the aircraft manufacturers. So the only way to set this right, or at least get a temporary injection or a Band-Aid on this wound, is to infuse cash by state interventions. For example, Boeing last week asked for and received about $6 billion in a cash infusion from the federal government. Now let's look at the airline operators, and this directly impacts you and me as travelers, right? What's the impact? Of course, the financial impact, as I already stated. Financial impact, but when aircrafts are grounding 96 to 98% of their fleet, they are not, their revenue streams has completely dried up, and they're bleeding cash. IATA again estimates about $61 billion on a quarterly spend in every day that the aircraft does not operate. So aircrafts are meant to fly. And the more you don't fly them, there are other costs that you have to incur. Whether you fly in or not, airline has got to pay their operating costs. Their costs for fixed assets, for manpower, and the parking management, as I mentioned before. So it's not as easy as parking a car, right? And even if you did park a car, you know that you cannot park it indefinitely. There's tunings, you've got to start the engine once in a while. And for aircraft, it's a very complicated machine with many avionics and hydraulics that have to be current, time-based, and there are a lot of checks. And that's partly what assures the safety of air travel, and that's at risk right now. So like, for example, you have to infuse giant silica sheets in the engines to keep it dry. You would have seen in recent news, there was an instance in the Delhi airport. And again, the maintenance of it is one thing, but the space for parking, when 2/3 of the fleet is grounded, where do you park there? Like, there are few places in the world that you could park such volumes of stranded fleet. And they need to be checked for conditions of safety for storage. For example, there are a few places like Pacific Springs, Southern Australia, where most of the Singapore Airlines fleet goes. In countries like India, where there's not enough aircraft storage space, the Delhi airport has converted its runway to be a parking storage area. And then the second factor to consider is consolidation or let's say phasing out or the survival of the aircraft itself. IATA again reports that there are over 800 airlines globally in the world today. And by May, which is now effectively, most airlines are going to go bankrupt, exactly for the reasons I specified below, ahead. And we're saying that with no passenger demand, the passenger or cargo is what powers this entire engine and fosters this ecosystem. And with no demand over there, and there's more cost that is going out than any revenue that is being made. So there's going to be network planning impacts. And in the old world, when we knew that you could take a flight from point A to point B, those points are going to be impacted in the future. So what's next? So some of the things that I'm familiar with that are going on in the industry, of course, the cash infusion, like for example, most of the national carriers or the full service carriers will obviously get the support of the government in order to survive because they have to. But the biggest impact will be on the LCCs or the low cost airlines, which have powered a travel for you and me as a great middle class in India. And these are not cash rich entities, and these are serious risks. And we're seeing the first casualties of all of this today in terms of Avianca in Latin America shut shop, Virgin Australia has been gone into administration. But the upswing for all of this could be the rise in digital technologies and a unique opportunity to collaborate with the ecosystem in terms of automation, in terms of contactless travel, in terms of biometrics, which are already being used sparingly but could be more widespread, the complete abolition of fingerprint scanners when you do your immigration, hand scanners, and a seamless check-in process, so to speak. Other initiatives in the digital space are like Apple and Google are now working on a contact tracing software license that could potentially help other developers to build compatible apps. These are absolutely imperative for this entire market to restart. And just for information, Emirates was the first airline which started COVID-19 testing pre-boarding, and their results are available in 10 minutes pre-check. So these are sort of things that we can see are going to be very real and very relevant in the future. So an example of the bankruptcy, as I mentioned, we are seeing these airlines fall to bankruptcy or to shutting shop or to fall. And this is going at a domino effect at a rapid pace as we speak today. The next ones to consider are airports. And again, if airlines have such an impact, then airports have it worse. And the reason for that is that if they're parked aircrafts in the airports, and by design, airports' business model is that they charge an parking fee to the airline that comes into the airport. So just to put things in perspective, in India, for an average airline per day, one aircraft per day, the parking cost is $1,000. So if I'm a reasonably mid-sized airline with about 250 jets, that's my operating cost per day being $12.5 million. So when I'm not making money, I'm a mid-sized airline and I'm bleeding out like this. It's a total crisis. It's absolutely appalling at the moment. Some examples I've quoted here is like Philadelphia International Airport has waived off the parking fee for airlines for the past 4 months, but this is not sustainable in the long run because almost 10% of airport revenues come from this revenue stream. Changi Airport built a large terminal 4 with the Jewel Shopping Mall last year, one of the largest shopping malls in the world in an airport. And they announced very early in April that they shut Terminal 2 for operations. And very recently, last week, they announced that they shut Terminal 4. So this is the kind of impact we're seeing. Again, the same points I made earlier in terms of airline impact and mitigations are relevant here. More so, the need of the hour is to work together in the ecosystem. This is also the bane of the industry because it is disparate in many portions. So there is opportunity here to consolidate, to work together. And Sharad mentioned earlier the impact of 9/11. You know that you all are common travelers just like me. And when you go to every country, the security measures are different. So this is an opportunity to unify, to globalize, and have a standard measure for travel, especially when you don't know what the visa and travel restrictions for each border and each countries are. So with that, I will go into how do we change this pretty picture. Mind you, the picture is pretty for us who are not, for those who are not in the aviation industry. But if you're part of the ecosystem, there's an absolute disaster because these birds are meant to fly, and the reasons I mentioned before will cost it more to stay on the ground. So how do we go from here to what I said at the very beginning, at the top of my presentation? Some of these measures you're already familiar with. Travel restrictions I talked about, not just from an intercontinental or international travel perspective. Within India, there are going to be border controls between states. That's a new reality we've got to adjust to. Cabin sanitization is more important than ever. Health and safety protocols, they don't exist now, but they've got to be determined and communicated ASAP. Luxuries that we were so familiar with in the past pre-COVID era are most likely not going to exist. The rise of digital solutions, as I mentioned before, contactless screening, time from curb to gate, these sort of things are absolutely critical. And without this ecosystem in place, the entire travel for passengers like you and me is going to be impacted. And lastly, my projections, and again, all my assessments are individualistic, not sponsored by any organization or employers. And the projections or the word on the market is that essential business travel segment will recover first, or at least look up in 2020, followed by the VFR segment, which is you and me visiting friends and travels. We've all been in lockdown forever. So the first thing we're going to do, as opposed to what Sharath said, which is go grab a drink, we're going to go visit our family and friends and those we are not physically co-located with. And you can see that in some countries like China, the segment is already recovering, is the first one on the horizon. And in India, when the skies are approaching and the skies are going to be open soon, it's something to look up to. So I will end with the disclaimer and my bio, and most of the data I referenced are available on these sources. And if you don't need any of this data, I will happily share. So on that note, thank you for having me. We have over-exceeded the time. So if you have any questions, let us know. We will probably answer you in the chat or outside. Back to you, Maya.
Well, thanks, Zaida. I think Maya's having some technical glitches. So I'm going to take over. And I've got done with my drink now. So I'm going to just take over. So, you know what, very interesting insights that you put out. You know, there's obviously a lot of stress that's floating around in my industry. And, you know, when I speak to colleagues and my team, obviously airlines industries, the travel industries really hit back. So having, you know, looked at all that, you know, we finally actually, we do have Shaiju in the house. He's managed to sort out all the technical sort of glitches he was facing, and he's in the house. So he's our wellness expert. So Shaiju, when you heard us all speak, right? You're hearing what your friends say. So what's your take on all this? So what do we do? A lot of us are helpless out there. What are we going to do? Over to you, Shaiju.
Now, I have no clue if you realize what a difficult question that is. What do we do? I wish I had the answer. The truth is I don't. I don't think anyone has the answer right now. To kind of go back specifically to set the context about the wellness. So it was on the 25th of February that the Director General declared that there were more cases outside of China for the first time. One sec. Yeah, it is also the first time that he used the P word for pandemic. Something interesting happened the very next day. Sales of resistance bands, sales of dumbbells, sales of yoga mats, sales of pull-up bars went up as much as by 500% in some cases from one day to the other. This obviously was a worldwide trend. We saw that replicate itself in India in March when the lockdown was announced. Downloads of fitness apps went up by 30%. Consumer spends went up by as much as 60%. With that, I'm going to get off slide share and yeah. I'm going to try and spin a story from now onwards. Okay, so what we know is that there was a definitive jump from the time before the lockdown and after. So there's before COVID and after COVID when it comes to wellness. See, in normal times, change happens and it happens slowly. Some of these get accelerated over time. This crisis, to be sure, will pass, but the virus will linger. Similarly, some of new ways of life will stick on. The beauty and wellness industry is reeling today. But the need for beauty and wellness is never going to go away. It'll bounce back. It'll bounce back in a different avatar. It'll bounce back in a different delivery system. Now, that delivery system is going to be enabled by technology. And that avatar will include mental wellness. What those graphs I put up showed you was an uptick in the symbols of physical fitness. But there's another storm that's brewing. Let me paint a picture for you. Now, we've been sitting inside our homes for the past 2 months, and the enemy is lurking outside our doors. There's so much of confusion on how to handle this enemy. Is it social distancing, herd immunity, masks, no masks? Are governments underreacting? Are governments overreacting? There are supporters on either side of this argument with graphs, charts, but we're not doctors, we're not epidemiologists, we're not data readers. Because we hear all this, we are disoriented, which means emotions begin to take over in our interpretation of facts. Answers are evolving. There's nothing conclusive, which means that anxieties are running loose. So while we're sitting here with the virus hammering on our doors, what we hear is there are people dying with not enough people to bury them. Initially, we were told that children, youngsters are not getting affected. Today, we find that youngsters are getting affected. Delivery boys are being carriers. Anxieties are running loose. Our minds are painting the bleakest pictures. Add to this the parallel contagion of news. Now, to keep ourselves informed, we're gobbling up whatever news that we can get. But what we're finding is that the more information we have, the lesser we realize that we know. So there is a contagion of the virus. There is a contagion of news. Now, this is a Molotov cocktail waiting to explode. What are the contexts in which this is happening, right? This 24/7 bombardment of news. Back in the day, we had fixed hours for news. We had a bulletin at 8 in the morning, at 1 in the afternoon, 8 at night. The newspaper came once in the day, we read that, and then we went back to our daily lives. Not so today. At least going back to our daily lives took our minds off it for a moment. But here, there's second by second updates, which means that there is absolutely no respite from the bad news that we kind of getting now. And because of the emphasis on news every second, you have no clue what the source of this news is. There's so much misinformation. And because we need to process it, the environment, if you look at it, the environment overall is also polarized, which means there is no trust in leaders, there is no trust in experts. We suspect everyone's motives. Is a nation responsible for it? Is a community trying to get to us? Is there a geography or a social strata that's more susceptible? We've begun to judge everything. While all this is happening in the wide world, we are isolated. We are sitting within ourselves. And we are seeing all this happening outside. Now, this panoramic view that we see on the screen can be overwhelming. And look at the kind of perspective. Look at the diverse things that we get worried about. On the one hand, we talk about the future of the planet. Is the planet going to be the same? And we are stressed about it. On the other hand, we worried about the cake that we've put in for baking, which needs to go into an Instagram feed. Is that going to look good? That stresses out as well. And the stress is equal for both of these, right? So this is actually a massive test of our perspective, our processing skills, and our equanimity. Imagine this, a climactic scene in a movie where the enemy is not just banging on the door, but the enemies come in and beating the hell out of our hero, who really doesn't know what the hell to do. So he just curled himself into a fetal position because he feels so helpless. It's pretty much the same. We're sitting inside our houses. There's information that's coming in. Nothing of it sounds good. We don't trust any of these that are coming. So we just find ourselves in a mental and an emotional crouch, getting hammered from all sides. That is what's happening today. How did we get here? If you look at in the last 25 years in liberalized India, we've just been running. We've been chasing. There's been this future, this perfect future that all of us have been conditioned to expect, where we have bigger houses, bigger cars, happy family, great social status, and so on and so forth. We've been building floor after physical floor of materialism without bothering about the mental and emotional edifice on which each of these things stand. We're running, keeping our eyes forward there, not really bothering about where we are placing our next foot. There have been signs of this edifice cracking for a while, but no one's really been talking about it. Like Sharad kept mentioning how we're a resilient bunch. Ashok put up graphs of how this has been happening for thousands of years. But you must remember, resilience is something that we talk about when we look at it in hindsight, not while we're going through it. It's like there's a man who's fallen off a ship and he's drowning. And you're telling him, listen, you stay afloat for long enough, there'll be a passing ship that'll come and pick you up, or the waves will wash you ashore. It's not the same, but we have to teach him how to swim in the first place, which we haven't been doing. Corporates now are realizing it. You know, one of the biggest elephants in the room in corporate India is mental health. People have been running without really being conditioned to how to handle this enormous quote unquote success that all of us have got. We need to know how to deal with it. No one's teaching us how to do that. There's a research that was conducted which said that work-related stress, there's 89% of India's workforce actually has work-related stress. Workplace stress is destroying our health, and we've done nothing about it so far. Today, sitting inside the confines of our houses, I think we've begun to realize, I think we've begun to ask ourselves, why are we doing what we're doing? At the end of the day, I might have 4 cars, but I'm not able to drive out. Now, I've crossed the 7 seas. I'm working in the US, I'm working in Singapore, but I have my old mother and father who are in India. They can't deal with it themselves. Was this whole thing worth it? Are questions that are really being asked. I think that's a great starting point for talking about wellness, health, about mental wellness, which so far has been brushed under the carpet. I think that is going to come to the fore. So I will leave you with this prognosis of mine. You know, back in the 90s, when someone said they went to the gym, you pictured bulked up muscle men and women who walked around with barbells having steroids for meals. How much we've changed since then. Today, fitness is almost a regular chore. Going to the gym is a social hangout. It's pretty much the same. So today, when someone says that they're into meditation, the image that pops up is someone who's renounced the world wearing white with long flowing robes. I predict 20 years down the line, it's going to be as regular. Meditation is going to be as regular a chore as shampooing was in the 90s. In 2040, I see people sitting in coffee shops, in cabs, in metros, shutting their eyes whenever they can, trying to center themselves, trying to be here in the moment, trying to figure out where that next step is without really keeping their eyes off this elusive future ahead of them. Meditating, trying to focus on the here and the now. I think that will be one of the enduring wellness legacies of COVID-19. And if we begin talking about it now, I think we'll be a far happier nation, a far happier society going forward. And I'm hoping it's going to begin now, and I've already seen first signs of it happening. Over to you, Maya.
Thank you, Shaju. And in true Murphy's Law style, it has continued through the call. So I got logged off in between for a couple of minutes. We are very aware of time, and apologies for the slow start in the beginning. So just to get our audience back, just a quick question. What is one word, and you can type on the chat window, what is your one word that for you is definitive for the next 1 year or representative of the next 1 year? So if we can have a few words coming up on the chat, that would be interesting. And I will take the same time to ask our panelists that question. So maybe Ashok, we can start with you.
So I'll give you my one word, but before I give you my one word, I want to have 2 other words, right? These are really concepts, and please, I really do mean it. Trust science and stay optimistic, right? That's the thought I want to leave you with. The word is optimism. Back to you, Maya.
All right, Sharad, what do you think?
Well, with the background of saying cheers, I'm just going to say, stay resilient. That's all we can do. Stay resilient.
Sure.
What do you?
So before we go to Zaida, I just want to read out a few from the chat. So Lalita says mask and meditation. Pradeep says a new normal. Pradeep says a new normal. Ashwin says hope. Partha Sarma says human. And Preeti Gopinath says renaissance. Manisha says vaccine. And Joseph says digitization. Karthik says opportunities. So it's very interesting how all of us have completely different takes on next year, completely, even I think across the panel. So Zaida, what's your word?
For me, it is digitalization, and I mentioned why in my pitch. I think it's more important than ever that we have a central data system. Everyone is interconnected, not just physically, but virtually, and it's going to be of paramount importance next year.
Cool. Shaiju?
I think it's interesting, and it, in a way, if I were to belabor the point that I was making about how people tend to look outward without looking inward, everything, most words that have come out focuses on what is outside, whether it's digitization, all the rest of the stuff, opportunities. I think that one word for me is uncertainty.
Okay. All
It's
right.
going to remain for a long time, and the sooner we deal with it, the better it would be. I saw inward popping up somewhere.
Yeah,
Thanks,
so Arvind Kasturi says inward. Purni is saying resurgence. Praveen is saying adapt. Compulsory, not by choice. And
introspection. More people are listening to me.
Vinu Krishnan says introspection. So I think Shaiju's won the popular vote. All right. So we are very cognizant of time. So we are happy to take questions, and we'll stay on to do that. Any of you need to get your dinners and kids and all of that, please carry on. But we'd love to stay on and take questions. So the first one I would say goes to Zaida. I'm just going to go back. Yeah, with data again remaining the oil to enable digitization, can you shed light on enhanced data privacy norms in data exchange? For instance, airlines versus airports digitization.
Okay, I have got two questions actually, which I'm both keen to address. But again, point to note, it's my perspective. So firstly, data, because a couple of you have asked, thank you for asking that question. There is in the new world, if you want to effectively manage safety, hygiene, concepts like digital immunity passports are going to be real in the near term, that too. That's why I mentioned also when will we touch the skies again? The imperative for that to happen is safety. Otherwise, you and me are not going to take that risk. We're going to be okay. We'll complain a bit, but we're going to be okay. So as far as GDPR data privacy issues are concerned, I also stated an example that Apple and Google and really the telecom providers and the data network infrastructure providers have the power to create a system that is universal at the outlook, but offering data privacy at the hands of the user. Today, we are doing all of this in terms of using your Apple. Aren't you doing Apple Wallet? Aren't you doing Google Pay? It's the same concept. It just extends to health. That's number one. Second thing, there was a question on how safe is it to travel locally or internationally by Karthik. Can I address that also, Maya? Are we good?
Yes, we're good.
Okay. So I chose to answer this because it's super important. And of course, it's a top of mind question, right? All of us are raring to go because we had so many dreams and aspirations and experiences we wanted to embrace. But in the near term, it looks like a dead end. So a couple of things to note here. And I will point you also to this press release that was released by the President and Managing Director of Airbus for India, Southeast Asia on this topic. And statistics say, and IATA backs it, that air inside the cabin is refreshed every 3 minutes because the airflow cycle in the aircraft is designed to flow top to down. So fresh air comes from top. You will recall when you sit in the cabin on your chair, there's a whoosh coming on top of you. So air flows top down, it gets consumed at the vents at the bottom. And the cycle is every 3 minutes. This is on par or even better than a surgical operating room. And the reason for this is because they use HEPA filters, which have the capability for filtering, clarifying, and catching particles. Ashok showed in his slides that the coronavirus particles about 1 micron. HEPA filters capabilities are from 0.01 micron to 0.03. So actually, I would go as far as saying that air travel or air transport is going to be probably the safest mode of transport post-COVID, even safer than you guys going to the mall to buy your groceries or to dine outside. Secondly, the concept of transmission of virus in the aircraft, hence there's data to prove that it's safe. But the real challenge comes in everything that Ashok started talking about at the very beginning. The transmission points are numerous outside the aircraft. So it's our personal responsibility also to use caution, use protection, a physical layer, and be cognizant of what you need to do outside the cabin. I hope that answers your question.
Thanks, Aida. Since everyone is muted, I'm assuming the person asked, the people who've asked have got the answer. So one for Sharath. This is from Lola. So in your opinion, what must the F&B industry invest in to adapt to this new reality?
That's a great question, Lola, and I sort of covered it in terms of where the F&B industry is going to be, the F&B industry in particular is going to be investing in is to quite an extent in digitization. When we look at an end user sort of experience, I think improving your F&B quality over and above the whole digitization bit, and most restaurants cannot afford that much of getting into digitization unless they're big chains. But for a restaurant or a bar, what we're predicting is there's going to be almost a 30% reduction in the existing universe out there, right, of bars and restaurants. In India, especially if you take a point, or if you look at India, there's a lot of pressure to sustain. The barrier to entry is so high. The cost of alcohol is so high. There's a 70% cess, COVID cess that has come up. So for restaurants, go back to your basics. It's all about your passion, your quality of food. So go back to what you started off that restaurant for. It's the quality, the experience. We humans will go back, we people go back only when the experience is great. If it ain't, then we ain't going back. So I hope that answers the question for restaurants. For people from the AlchoBev industry and other, sort of industries, it's definitely technology. Definitely technology. So I hope that answers it. Also, Maya, I have a question from Ronnie. It's been sent privately. So can I address that?
Sure.
Yeah, okay. So Ronnie asks, will it not be a government regulatory agency's nightmare monitoring online alcohol sale? Do you think Indian government agencies are geared up to handle this? Very, very pertinent. Keeping in mind, obviously, that photograph I flashed, and you've all experienced it. I don't think any of you queued up to stand for to get your case of beer or a bottle of your favorite scotch. It's very valid because we need to understand one thing. Do you know 65% of sales in India actually is government regulated? The route to market is actually the government, which is through corporation. What we call as, say, for example, KSBCL or West Bengal Corporation Limited. These are state-run organizations. They are your route to markets. So everything can be governed easily. A lot of outlets, in India, alcohol is the only regulated market. You don't need a license to sell BD, gutka, or cigarettes. But to sell alcohol, you need a license. Everything is regulated. How we manage the crowd, and it could be a bit political here, and I don't want to get into that side of the discussion, but yes, maybe we shouldn't be shutting down liquor stores, but just managing it well. Making sure the same way as grocery stores have a queue maintaining 6 feet distance, the same can be done here. When something is shut for a long time, and then when you suddenly open it, you see the crowds thronging. You have that mass hysteria. Everyone wants to stock up, which is what we saw with toilet rolls, for example, right? Let's be a bit careful. Let's have a bit of discipline. And the regulatory agencies, no, they're very well aware of it. So it's all under control, to be very frank. I hope that answers it.
Thanks, Sharad.
Thanks.
So I think in the interest of time, we'll take the last question that I see here. So this is one Preeti to Ashok. The question is, in NYC, we're hearing about COVID-19 related Kawasaki syndrome affecting children. Any anecdotal data in India? And she goes to say that when children are impacted, parents seem to pay more attention to health and rethink the whole reopening soon, debate. So over to you, Ashok.
Yep, a great question. I too have read that those publications recently. To the best of my knowledge, I haven't read anything about it in India. This does not mean it's not happening in India. It just means that there's probably nothing out in literature as yet. Anecdotally, probably better to ask a physician. They're closer to that side of things. I will keep an eye out for it. It is a worrying sort of progression in COVID because now it's hitting, I guess, below the belt, right? Can I just ask, were schools in New York City shut down during this time? So where are the kids getting the infection from? Is it primarily from adults? And schools in India have been shut down, exams, everything postponed. So I guess the chance of actually encountering someone with the disease will be tough. I think schools in India are going to continue to be shut down for at least 2 weeks. The expanded lockdown theory here is to continue the lockdown. But the short answer is I don't know of any such anecdotal incident in India. Thanks for that. Thanks for the question. Maya, if I can just, I had a question for Shaiju actually, right? And I thought this is a great time to ask it before you shut down. Shaiju, one thing I'm noticing with this epidemic right now is that never like before, the communities within countries at least, and definitely across countries to some extent, communities are coming together in a way I have never seen before, right? So let's say the government of India has got the ICMR and the Ministry of Health, and nobody is really, well, there is some chatter in the background, but nobody is really openly questioning the decisions being made at a policy level or anything. Everyone is happy to allow the people who do their jobs to do their jobs. There's not too much ripping apart of policy and so on and so forth, even though there are so many different thought processes on it. Do you feel in the corollary of what you were saying, which is going inward and being mindful, do you see a greater role for a combined mindfulness in I guess, propagating this sense of acceptance? Let the scientist do his job. He knows what he's doing. Let us not ask the questions there. Let the politician do his job. And will this growing inward actually exacerbate the sense of community unity that we have? Or do you think it will actually separate it more?
I think the two things to it, right? When you're talking about communities coming together, and they've pretty much been given a free hand, because from what it seems like, no one knows what they're doing. What the green signal they've been given, you go ahead and do it. If it works, otherwise it won't. Okay, so if you're talking about if that's what you define as people coming together, for sure they are. Now, going inward really, Ashok, means that when you, to kind of give you a perspective of where you stand vis-a-vis the rest of the world. So will that result in communities coming together? Of course it will. Going inward means that there is no you versus me. It just means that we are all in it together. In fact, I saw this very interesting comment, I think, which Preeti had put up, which said that right now we're talking about the economy opening up vis-a-vis health. These are seen as two ends of a spectrum, and we have to choose between one and the other. How unfortunate is that? Looking inward means that you look at everything in the same spectrum as you view yourself. Which means that if someone else gets hurt, you get hurt in the process. And that's how it is. Does it answer your question?
It's a tough one to wrap around, but yeah, I guess there's empathy and other such qualified emotions involved in there. So yeah, so I'm getting there. But thanks.
So we come to the end of our session. A big thank you to all of you who have logged in given a a kind ear to the ideas and thoughts that we have all shared. And also a special thank you to the speakers. Just maybe add one parting word from my end, being an HR professional. I think, pandemics, epidemics, bring out the best and worst in humankind. I would urge all of us on the call, because we're all, mostly professionals, either leading teams, leading companies, that we be mindful, I guess, of all the inputs that have come in. It's hopefully not a health versus business argument, to Preeti's point, and that it's all infused into one. So on that note, a big thank you to everybody. It's been an experiment for us. I hope we have the strength to do it again, after all the technical goofs that we have, but hopefully the messages have gone through. Please reach out to any of us at any time. We'd be happy to have a longer chat and answer any more questions, or even debate and discuss any thoughts you have. So on that note, thank you.
There's 50% of the total participants who stayed back till the end. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.